God is good, and with each day that passes brings us a day closer to the launch of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. This is the Nathan Napalm channel, and if you are new here, please consider subscribing, especially if you're interested in Pantheon related content on our march to launch. Today, guys, I want to talk about the races of Terminus. I want to talk about the racial traits mainly, but also a little bit of information about each race. Now that we finally have that information, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about it because I know if you guys are like me, you've been waiting on this. We're gonna do them in alphabetical order here. So of course we're going to start with the Archai, but before we begin, I want to give a big shout out to the members of Napalm for keeping this channel going and for your support. I love you. I thank you. If you're interested in becoming a member of Napalm, please click the join button down below for information and a list of perks. Okay, now let's get started here, guys. We're gonna start the Archai, which are explained as being bred as the ultimate of the slaves. The diverse and vigorous Archai manifest their freedom in celebration and battle. On the spectrum of uniqueness, the Archai come second only to their neighbor Gnomes. But in a sharp contrast, the culture of Suroa is as vibrant and strong as the massive crystals and ores of its geology. Devout and sincere, Archai bodies manifest their environment, their ethereal energy bonding with natural elements at a very young age. This permits the Archai to grow a bit larger than a human or elf, but not suffer in agility quite like an ogre. Loving celebration and battle almost equally, the Archai are positioned well to ascend in the frail age, should they choose. Now let's talk a little bit about their traits that they start out with. First up is Living Reservoir, which means that mana drain effects are reduced by a certain percentage point. Although it could change, it is worth noting when I talk about the mana drain that the Archai can be a druid, a shaman, or a wizard, all of which I'm assuming have MP or mana, and therefore that would be awesome for them. So there can be 3 different casting type classes, and that would be very beneficial to make it to where no one can drain their mana, or at least not 100%, right? They got a little bit of a resistance to that, so that's pretty cool. Next up, we have Effervescent, which makes the Archai immune to effects that drain endurance. So immune, so they can not only reduce the effects of draining their mana, but they're actually immune to effects that drain endurance. So a monk is a really good example of a class that the Archai can be, that definitely not being able to drain their endurance will be very beneficial, as well as the warrior, which is another class the Archai can be, that not being able to drain their endurance will be really good for. Now as far as the bard, we don't really know a lot of details about them, but it is listed that they can be a bard, so I'm not sure. We don't know their resources just yet. Now their next class trait is Elemental Attunement, which grants a bonus to the effectiveness of elemental based abilities based on attunement of fire, water, wind, and earth. Now remember that the Archai are bursting with an element type out of their skin. You can literally see it on their body, and I'm assuming at character create you'll decide what your attunement is, so fire, water, wind, or earth. So whichever one you choose, you have a bonus to the effectiveness of that elemental, which is going to be absolutely fantastic for the wizard, for sure. Definitely going to be a big boon to be an Archai wizard. Next up, we have Natural Acclimation, which gives the Archai an innate bonus to Acclimation score based on elemental attunement. Once again, fire equals scorching, water equals frigid, wind equals wind shear, or earth equals toxic. So once again, depending on your attunement that we assume at this time is going to be decided when you make your character at your character creation, depending on which one of those you attune to will give you a natural acclimation to those environments: scorching, frigid, wind shear, or toxic. And I think that's a really cool way to do it, so that you get more than just a visual cue, you actually get something from the racial from that, and I really like that. I think it's a great idea. Also, last thing about the Archai traits is that Archai do have an advantage against the playful disposition. So any mob with the playful disposition, the Archai will have an advantage against them, which is really cool. Now, I'm not saying that the Archai can't play any class that's within its, that is allowed, but I do think that the Archai, with the innate abilities with their attunement, sure does feel like to me that a lot of people are going to pick Wizard because the mana drain reduced. I don't know how much endurance will help a Wizard, but the attunement to give the bonus effectives to element-based abilities, and also just simply the way they look with the elements literally bursting out of their skin, I think we're going to see a whole lot of Archai Wizards running around. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's move on to the next race. So next up we have the Dark Mirror, which is the favorite so far for my wife, Winter. Let's read a little bit about them. So even in brokenness, the Mirror are a proud, masterful race, but while their majesty transcends the waters, they've yet to escape its bitter depths. So out on their own way, the Dark Mirror of Sirenai would perhaps become a contemporary of Thronefast, even its chief rival. But their native beauty, valor, and nobility have rusted down to bitter ornaments. A vast disdain for other races lurks beneath their tranquil surface, calling none friend and a few honored as foe. Their ferocity in battle is as ancient as their heralded origin, while their tall, slender form and ghostly eyes cast an unmistakable presence. Dark Mirror ambitions are a pregnant mystery, their kingdom quietly advancing on land and sea. Now first up for their racial traits is the Vestige of Sirenai, which grants underwater breathing and increased swim speed, so they can swim faster. Now for the people who's looking forward to them growing mermaid tails in the water, that unfortunately is not so, at least at the launch of the game. They're not going to have that in the game. If they will later, we'll see, but they will not be turning into a mermaid, much to my wife's dismay. However, she doesn't have to worry about drowning. My wife's not very good at swimming in MMOs, and so she doesn't have to worry about drowning, at least, because the Dark Mirror can breathe underwater, and of course they can swim faster, which is to be expected since they come from an ocean-type planet. Next up is they are perceptive, which increases their insight skill by 10 points. Now, I believe this should be good for the perception system, and of course it will, I think this will also tie into dispositioning of mobs, and probably lots of other things as well. Next up we have Embittered Psych, which increases both stealth effectiveness and awareness by 10 points. So it will be harder for things to stealth around them, the more likely to see them, as well as they're able to actually stealth better. Which, by the way, speaking of stealth, the Dark Mirror can be a rogue, so that's an advantage there for that specific class, but being able to be aware of stealthiness would be actually beneficial to any class. Next up we have Born of Deep Waters. This grants an innate bonus to anaerobic and pressure acclimation. So deep water swimming would be hard for a lot of races. They, like humans in real life, we can't go too deep. The pressure will actually kill us if we go too deep underwater because the amount of water on top of us. Well, because the Dark Mirror are from a planet of water and they're used to deep diving into oceans, etc., they have a natural acclimation to that, as well as to anaerobic, which I'm assuming would go into effect for fighting underwater. I'm assuming that's what it sounds like to me. Or maybe the deeper you go, the slower you swim with the other races. However, it doesn't affect them as much. We'll see. That's an interesting one though. Also, the Dark Mirror have an advantage against the cunning disposition. They don't fall for that crap. Try to be cunning around a Dark Mirror, they're not going to fall for it. And I like that. So what's interesting about the Dark Mirror to me is that this is kind of an all-around class. Besides the stealth effectiveness, which would hugely impact and help a rogue, but it also comes with stealth awareness, so that would be good for anybody. So I do gotta say the Dark Mirror seems pretty well-rounded grounded in their racial traits. Now, one more thing I want to say about the Dark Mer before I go to the next race is that about that insight thing. So I want to talk about something about the insight. So in D&D, which we all know Pantheon Rise of the Fallen is very steeped in Dungeons and Dragons. In D&D, insight decides whether you can determine the true intentions of a creature, such as when searching out a lie or predicting someone's next move. So in conversation pieces, perhaps, and perception checks with the Dark Mer, that could be an advantage. Doing so involves gleaning clues from body language, speech habits, and changes in mannerisms, which also maybe insight could be a factor into blocking with a shield or a dodge against an attack, perhaps. So real quick, let's look at what classes the Dark Mer can be, because they can be a lot. They can be a bard, a cleric, a dire lord, a druid, an enchanter, a monk, a necromancer, a rogue, a summoner, a warrior, and a wizard. Now these could change, right? For example, I think the Dark Mer should be able to be a paladin too, in my opinion. But these could change. This is as of the last time they told us what races could be what. At the time of this recording, that's what we know. But almost all the classes of Dark Mer can be. The only ones they can't be is a paladin, a ranger, and a shaman, and that could change. But it's interesting to know about that with the insight, because it kind of gives away some of their other innate abilities, such as cunning doesn't work on them, or they can notice stealth because their insight is better. Therefore, they're going to be more perceptive and notice that. Anyway, let's keep moving forward on to the next race. So now we've got the Dwarves, which is a robust and enduring champions of combat and mysticism. The Dwarves of Kadasa are fiercely loyal to their king. For the good of his people, the Dwarven King Kazos sacrificed his immortality to rule among them in the wintry fortress of Kadasa. This selflessness is a crown virtue of the Dwarven race, and to have one as a friend is worth more than several lifetimes of fortune. Believing peace is a product of strength, the Dwarves seek not an empire, but to increase their mastery in smithing, the arcane as well as battle. Their compact form is rarely mistaken for lumbering stiffness, as their reputation in all types of conflict is widely established. I love dwarves. If you didn't know that, I think they're awesome. So let's talk about what kind of racials did this awesome, sweet, absolutely fantastic race, what did they get? Number 1, Fortitude, baby. Dwarves gain extra hit points from each point of stamina. The higher your stamina, the higher their hit points go. They also get Grip of the Dwarven Father, which grants immunity to disarm. You cannot disarm a dwarf. Nobody tries, you can't do it. I love it, I think that's awesome. Ice and Stone, which is an innate bonus to cold resistance, frigid and toxic acclimation. I love it. So I was expecting cold resistance for dwarf, right? Especially because the dwarves of Pantheon, I mean, they kind of got that bluish hue to them. They're made basically out of rock. You ever seen a frozen rock? I haven't, but to also see the toxic acclimation, it also makes sense. Ice and Stone makes sense, or they'd be harder to poison, right? So it doesn't mean that they can't get cold. It just means they have a bonus to resistance of that acclimation. So frigid and toxic. Also, they get Mountain Forged, which increases blunt weaponry skills by 10 points. Man, the dwarves looking pretty sweet for that paladin, I'm telling you. And lastly, the dwarves have an advantage against the avenging disposition. So I really like this. I think this is well-rounded, very, very tanky, right? Doesn't this feel very tanky to everyone? So let's look at what classes that the dwarf could be. Dwarf can be a bard, a cleric, an enchanter, a paladin, a rogue, or a warrior. So obviously, I think we will see a lot of warrior and paladin dwarves, especially since as of now, at the time of this recording, only the human and dwarf can be a paladin. So I think we will see a lot of that. Plus, with these abilities, it really does make sense to be a warrior, be a paladin, or even a cleric as a dwarf. These are more tankier type classes, wear heavier armor, use blunt weapons, or at least can use a blunt weapon if they so choose. So I can definitely see that, and it does seem to fit those very well. And in my opinion, those will be the most popular picks for people who just have to play a dwarf. Alright, on to the next race. Now we have the elves, a long afflicted. The elves now mourn and flourish under the council rule of Bertel and the brilliance of the lucent tree. With loyalty that is not easily won or lost, elves carry an immortal sense of how fleeting life is, born of their own brushes with total extinction. But far more than frail survivors, they are unrivaled artists, from architecture to agriculture, with arcane and physical prowess as natural as the wind, rain, and storm. Sibling hearts divide the race into two distinct groups. Ashen Elves steward Bertel from within, eternally vigilant in watching guard, while the Ember Brethren cast an aggressive eye toward the surrounding lands, rooting out evil where it resides. Now let's look at the elves and their traits. Lucent Ancestry. This grants an innate resistance to nature magic and increases the effectiveness of nature abilities. So resist nature magic, but also can perform it more effectively. Obviously, what does that sound like? That sounds like that'd be great for a druid, which is obviously a good pick for an elf, right? Almost anywhere you look in any kind of lore of an elf, druid just seems to fit pretty well. Next up, we have Nimble, which increases the effectiveness of skills and abilities modified by agility. So this is interesting because two classes come to mind, the ranger and the rogue, and it can be both of those, right? You know, a little bit maybe the warrior, right? But definitely the ranger and the rogue and agility, I do believe that they're gonna see a major boon for that. Now, I think there's a typo on the website at the time it's recording for elf, because after that it mentions ice and stone, which is actually a dwarf ability to make them resistant or to have acclimation to frigid and toxic. I think that's a typo, but it does show it under there, but it doesn't give a description. I think that's a mistake, and I think there's something else supposed to go there. But it does actually go on to say the elves have an advantage against the true sight disposition. Now, we have to break it down now into the two different types of elves, right? So if you choose an Ember Elf, they get unflinching, which grants an innate 20% chance to resist knockdown and knockback abilities, which could be good for any class in certain circumstances, but definitely seems to benefit a tank, in my brain at least, more. So like a warrior who should be the one taking the knockdowns or the knockback abilities most of the time. And 20%, that's a pretty freaking good innate chance there. And next, the Ember Elf gets Deftness, which grants an extra attack rating from each point of dexterity. Once again, melee classes, and the ranger can do some melee too, so we can't leave them out of that. So ranger, rogue, the bard probably, the warrior, they're gonna get a lot of bonuses there. So if you're gonna go with one of those, it does sound like, to me, in my opinion, the Ember Elf may be the way to go. Now the Ashen Elves, if you decide to go with that type of elf, they get Deep Recitation, which grants an innate 20% chance to resist spell interruption and counter spell abilities. So obviously now we're talking about being hard to interrupt their spells and being able to counterspell or resist a counterspell. So now this side of the elves, the Ashen Elves, now that sounds like the good pick if you're going to go with more of a magic type. So the Druid, the Enchanter, the Shaman, the Summoner, or the Wizard, all of which the elf so far can be. And last up, for the Ashen Elves, they have Sagacious, which gives Ashen Elves gain an extra spell rating from each point of wisdom. And by the way, you left out that D there, Visionary Realms. It's not wisdom, it's wisdom. But anyway, so that would be great once again. So this is where kind of the dividing line is, right? Is that the Ember Elves are more for combat, you know, melee, etc. And Ashen Elves more for magic in their innate abilities and what they can, you know, what they withhold. So they're pretty rounded because they're split, right? So that makes them pretty rounded. And also, I think the Ice and Stone thing was a mistake. I don't think that's supposed to be there at all, because that would give them 4 racials, which is pretty much what every other race has, right? So I think that was just put there by mistake. It's not supposed to be there at all, because that would mean they would get 4 if you combine their just elf abilities, Lucid Ancestry, and Nimble, plus then you get 2 more depending on whether you pick Ember Elves or Ashen Elves. But between those 2, they're pretty well rounded, and it pretty much covers something good for every class, at least that we know of right now, that the elf can be. Alright, let's move on to the next race. And next up we have the Gnomes, which is an enigmatic and isolated within the floating keep of the Skyhold. The Gnomes are masters of the arcane and the peculiar. It is a splendid irony that the smallest of the foreign races contains the most mystery. Peerless in understanding and wielding of the arcane, the Gnomes are beings without true physical form due to the events on their home world. Meticulous and easily absorbed in the many tasks aboard their floating city ship Skyhold, diligence and service tend to be the highest Gnome virtues, along with sound innovation. Expansion is not a cultural aim, and the Gnomes have no real enemies, but some do long to face the perils and prizes of Terminus at large. Now let's look at the Gnomes' traits. First up, we have Incantation Mastery, which grants an innate 20% chance to resist silence. So not being able to be silenced would be great for any caster, which for the Gnomes would be the Enchanter, the Necromancer, the Summoner, or the Wizard. They have a lot of casting here. Actually, they don't have much else. The only race they can be is a Rogue, and that's it, at least so far at the time of this recording. So, 20% chance, once again, that's pretty dang good that you cannot silence them, which is awesome. If you're a caster, you don't want to be silenced, right? Next up, we have Enigmatic Brilliance. Gnomes gain extra mana from each point of intelligence. So you can stack up your mana pool to be a lot larger if you pick the Gnome race. So once again, for casters would be absolutely fantastic. Next, they have Ethereal Being. This increases their dodge chance by 3%. So if you're getting attacked, being a little bit of an extra amount to increase your dodge is great for any class. However, this one does seem to be very roguish in nature. But of course, like I said, that's good for any class. Next up, we have the Constant Scholar, which increases the rate at which skills improve. Now that's good for every class because your skills can improve faster than other races. So that's pretty cool and I like it. It's very unique. Also, the Gnomes have an advantage against the Mastermind disposition. Why? Because they're smart. It's hard to outsmart a Gnome. They're freaking smart. They're smart little dudes, man. They might not have bodies. They might not have physical bodies. You have to wear the mask and the stuff so that you can see them, but they're smart little guys under there. Just because they don't have physical form doesn't mean their little spirit brain isn't really good. It's really smart, man. You can't, Gnomes they're smart, all right? That's all there is to it. Anyway, I think the Gnomes are a very unique race because they don't have a physical form. They're all spiritual and stuff, and they wear the mask because that gives them a face and all that kind of, I love it. I think the Gnomes are cool, and these are pretty cool traits, and I know lots of you are looking forward to being a Gnome, and that, honestly, for a casting class especially, it's gonna work out really well in my opinion. Alright, on to the next race. Now we've got the Halflings. Man, I like the Halflings. They remind me of the little Kokiri people in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Anyway, they're a fiery, youthful race, filled with mirth, recklessness, and charm. But the exuberance of the Halflings masks an ancient curse. A refreshing blend of madness and mirth, the Halflings of Wild's End have a youthful exuberance that never dims, and a resolute spirit that makes them undefeatable. With the effortless stealth of a wolf and the devious charm of a child, there are few circumstances in which a halfling cannot work for the upper hand, especially in the trees of their home. Therefore, their reduced stature is an advantage, an unassuming and agile extension to their personalities and gifts, whether in danger, discourse, or dance. Now let's talk about their traits. First up, we have Wild Mind, which grants innate resistance to charm and mesmerize effects. So they're very hard to charm and mesmerize. I mean, that sounds pretty good to me. I don't want to be charmed and I don't want to be mesmerized. That's some dangerous stuff right there. So they have an innate resistance to that, and that's excellent, and that could benefit absolutely anybody. Next up, they have Dagger Specialization. I hope you're listening, minus from Pantheon Plus, because this is your race, man. This is them. This is the Halflings. You must be a Halfling because you must be a rogue, and Dagger Specialization gives the Halfling increased Dagger skill by 10 points. And we all know backstabby rogues, that's definitely for you, baby. The Fire of Youth, which grants a bonus to the effect of consumables. Once again, that'd be good for anybody, but I just can't help it. Rogues, they die quickly. If they're attacked, they have to use consumables to stay alive. I'm still feeling rogue here. Of course, that'd be good for anything else. Halflings can be bards, they can be druids, they can be rangers, they can be rogues, and of course they can also be warriors, which is hilarious. I can't wait to see some halfling warriors out there. That'll be very interesting, and their consumables will be more powerful for it. A little dagger-wielding warrior. I can't wait. Next up, we have Wraith Hunters, which grants a bonus to damage inflicted against Wraith targets. And according to streams we've seen, there's quite a few Wraith targets, including some I think may fall in that category that will be raids, so that's pretty cool. And if you take that with some backstabbing crit damage, plus it's a Wraith, oh my gosh, you're talking lethal here, and I love it. Also, the Halflings have an advantage against the deranged disposition, okay? They're a little deranged themselves, they're a little reckless, right? You can't out derange an halfling. They're the epitome of deranged, okay? Childlike and all that kind of thing. I love the halfling, by the way, guys. I think they look so cool. I think one of the models, when we get to see the final model, we get to see them in game, I think everybody's gonna fall in love with the halfling, man. I just think they've done a really good job of kind of getting away from the Hobbit kind of feel, and halflings just being this really cool smaller race that just, I don't know, I don't like the hairy feet of hobbits, okay? It's weird, it's disgusting. I like hobbits, but when I see their feet, I'm like, oh, God, why'd you have to show that? I don't like it. So I like that it looks like they're getting away from the hairy feet with the halflings in Pantheon. And anyway, lots of good abilities there, especially, I mean, this is screaming rogue to me. Everything about this is screaming rogue. Of course, you know, you can do what you want to do, right? Just do whatever you want to do with the halfling. But man, if you want to be a rogue, this seems like number one to me. All right, on to the next race. Now we've got the most craziest race in all of Pantheon, the humans. Who would have thought that you could be a human in Pantheon in the world of Terminus? Anyway, guys, I very likely will be a human, I gotta be honest here. But anyway, let's talk about them. So since the dawn of Thronefast, 5 centuries ago, humans have stood at the pinnacle of influence, surviving threats against their walls and those from within. True power speaks not a word, yet its presence is deafening. The city of Thronefast has been that presence for the humans for nearly 500 years, and to know their heights of power is to behold the capital, a breathtaking jewel in the light of dawn. The breadth of their influence is glimpsed in the majestic navy, unrivaled on the open waters. Students and masters of nearly every art and discipline, humans' middle rung size and strength is perhaps a lone mediocrity. Their off-flamboyant pride not withering before kings, ghouls, or dragons. So the interesting thing, by the way, that it kind of mentioned there was that humans can literally, at the time of this recording, be any class they want. They can be a bard, a cleric, a dire lord, a druid, an enchanter, a monk, a necromancer, a paladin, a ranger, a rogue, a shaman, a summoner, a warrior, or a wizard. They're the only class, at the time of this recording, that can literally be anything they want to be. The Dark Mirror has the second most slots at the time of this recording. Now anyway, let's talk about the traits of humans. A people inspired. This increases melee, ranged, and spell haste by 2%. I'm feeling it, baby, I'm feeling it. So that would be good for rangers, rogues, paladins, warriors, dire lords, bards, probably. But the spell haste, also, I'm feeling, you know, any caster class gets a little bit of that, but also the paladin, I'm feeling a little bit of that, right? Next up, we have Wanderlust, which grants a bonus to faction gain with neutral factions. This also increases experience gained through exploration, because humans like to explore and conquer, and they are good with weaseling their way into factions. So it makes sense, and I think that was a great fit. I've seen that in other games, right, where they get a little faction gain a little faster. I'm not going to mention any names, but there are some other games out there I've seen that with, and it makes sense. It's good for a human. Next up, and by the way, that would be good for any class, obviously. Next up would be Shield Specialization. Increases shield mastery skill by 10 points. Warriors, clerics, And paladins, baby. I mean, guys, when I read these, I was like, ooh, I really like the dwarf. I really like the dwarf, but ooh. See, my wife doesn't want me to be a dwarf. She thinks dwarves are ugly. How dare she? But she wouldn't mind me being a human. I gotta be a paladin, right? So, anyway, I read the human. I was like, oh, man, VR really wants me to be a human, okay? Now, let's see the next one. So the next one is Bastian Charm. This increases the effectiveness of skills and abilities modified by charisma. And also, the humans have an advantage against the alarmist disposition, which is a scary one, right? The alarmist is one that's going to run out and grab other people and bring more to you, which is definitely like death, right? In Pantheon Rise of Fallen. So this is a well-rounded race, I gotta say. And I'm not going to talk much about the humans, because humans are humans. And honestly, you can use these for anything you want, but shield specialization, to me, kind of changes the game a little bit. Plus, the melee, the range, and the spell haste. Oh, man. I'm just feeling paladin. But, of course, it's good for... That's good for all races. Kind of got it all covered, right? And they can be any class, so it's a good fit. And I think VR did a good job with the human. I feel like that's one of the more difficult ones to do, because we are humans, and you want to make it interesting, but you got, anyway, on to the next race. Next up, we have the Ogres. Once a unified and victorious host, the Ogres require a new breed of warriors to restore their heritage of militant glory. With their hulking presence and a culture that values the brutal skills of battle above refinements or leisure, the Ogres of Broken Maw are perilously dismissed as primitive by the uninformed. Yet careful study would reveal a race that relishes the dance of warfare tactics and in whom resides an unmatched respect for valor and courage. Whether friend or foe, when calm, Ogres are cautious and considerate before action. Unseat their emotions, and their incomparable size wreaks unpredictable ends. So the Ogres look really cool, and I think everybody here, when they think of an Ogre, thinks of Dire Lord. So let's go ahead and let's see what their traits are and see what it fits with. So first up, we have Broken Maw's Grit. Ogres gain extra attack rating from each point of strength. Okay, I'm thinking warrior. I'm thinking dire lord. Okay, next up we have Staggering Strength, which increases critical damage by 5%. Now keep in mind, the ogre can be a dire lord, they can be a druid, they can be a shaman, or they can be a warrior. So far, I'm seeing the advantage with dire lord and warrior, as would probably be expected for an ogre, let's be honest. Next up we have Battle Hardened. This grants an innate 25% chance to resist non-magical stun effects. This becomes 100% immunity to non-magical stuns during Battle Trance. If Battle Trance is active, they are immune to non-magical stuns. Great for a tank. I mean, great for anybody. But that Battle Trance is screaming tank, okay? Now, they only get the 3. Most of these races have 4. They only get 3, but they're pretty OP, so I guess that's why. Now, Ogres do also have an advantage against the bloodthirsty disposition. Hopefully you're seeing a pattern here. Ogres are bloodthirsty. Maybe not as much as Skar, but they're pretty battle-hardened, bloodthirsty. You can't out-bloodthirst an ogre unless maybe you're a Skar, right? And they're just vicious creatures. We're about to get to them in a minute. Overall, very good. Obviously, I don't think I'm blowing anybody's mind here when I say an ogre is a good option for a tank. Not to say that you can't be a shaman and be a good one, or you can't be a druid and be a good druid. I'm not saying that, but as you can tell from a racial perspective, the ogre is a very good tank. All right, now it's time, guys. It's time to talk about the vicious, frightening, disturbing race of the Skar. With an insatiable greed and appetite for carnage, the Skar fear nothing and have proven to be their own greatest adversary. If there was an opposite to any good thing in every race, the Skar would stand alone in the extreme. Suicidally vicious, tribal, and short-sighted, the Skar fear only their 9 god and are their fervent only in their hatred. A ravenous desire to consume fits with their thin, predatorial size and build, and they attack to overwhelm quickly, lacking exceptional endurance. Their role on the stage of Terminus has the most uncertainty, for their battles rage as much within Skar goal as they do outside of it. So first of all, the Skar get long suffering. This increases their maximum health by 5%. That sounds wonderful. And By the way, guys, the Skar can be a Dire Lord, a Monk, a Necromancer, a Rogue, a Shaman, or a Warrior. Now, increasing health is good for anybody, right? Of course, I'm billing Warrior more because they need the health to take more damage, but nobody's gonna miss getting extra health, okay? Next up, we have Fear of the Nine God. This grants an innate 20% resistance to fear effects. Why? Because they're not scared of anything but the Nine God. So it's very hard to fear a Skar, okay? Makes sense, makes a lot of sense. Next up, we have Pack Hunter. This increases movement speed up to a maximum of 5% when in range of Skar group members. I think this is very unique because they like to rush and attack things in packs, right? So they can move faster when they are in range of other Skar. And that makes sense, and I really think that's really cool. I like to see stuff like that. That's an awesome thing. And you know, Skar is one of those things where I do expect to see guilds made entirely of Skar. And you know, communities inside of Terminus where it's Skar groups and things like that because they're so unique, right? Now, Skar also have an advantage against the predatory disposition up to a certain percentage to damage dealt and take away a certain percentage to damage received. They may also nullify certain aspects of the disposition's effects. So this is very specific to the predatory, and that's because Skar are the predators, right? So someone with the predatory disposition is at a disadvantage when they're going up against the ultimate predator of Terminus. You see what I mean? So it makes a lot of sense. So they don't do as much damage to them, and the Skar does more damage to them. So, and then of course a lot of their other effects are just nullified, and which I think is smart and makes sense. And honestly, that's good for any class, right, that they can be. So guys, that's all the races. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you think that my suggestions for race and class were decent? Now, obviously, in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you should do what you want to do. This is not a game where the community is pushing for the meta. We all know what's going to happen. We all know those people will be there, but you should play Pantheon the way you want to play it. It's more of a free-form game. You can only get 8 skills on a bar at once, right? So it's more free-form in how you decide to play, what skills you decide to take advantage of, and it's just, anybody who's played EverQuest knows that it's just more freedom there with how you play your class. Therefore, the meta is less important to most people in most scenarios, right? So you play what you want to play, but do you think my suggestions made any kind of sense, or you agree with them, or you thought of something I didn't think of in these racials? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm super happy that we finally got to find out the racials. Now, keep in mind, of course, these could change over time as they're testing them, etc. They may find issues and they may be balanced a little bit, but as of the time of this recording here, on August 31st, 2020, this is what the official Pantheon MMO website states for these races and what their racial traits will be. I hope you enjoyed the video today, guys, and of course, if you're not already subscribed, please consider doing so, especially if you're interested in Pantheon related content. We also cover old school MMOs, MMORPGs, RPGs, CRPGs, JRPGs, all that kind of stuff as well. And a big shout out to the members of Napalm. Thank you so much for making this channel possible. And if you are interested in becoming a member of Napalm, please click the join button down below for more information, of course a list of perks for doing so. And until next time, guys, God bless and happy gaming. Please listen to what I say. I've been making videos all day. It's a video buffet, you can even hit replay. But please just subscribe. I can't even describe being part of my tribe. I'll even offer you a prize, but just please just subscribe and hit the bell notification too.